Hey, how are you? My name's Svelte. Welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV. Today we're talking about tanking in dungeons. Now, why am I specifically saying in dungeons? Because there is a big difference in the way you tank and the way you use your cooldowns versus how you use them in raiding. So I want to very clearly state this is all about dungeon tanking. I want to make that abundantly clear. What we're going to go through in this video is a combination of like my personal preferences for when I want to be a quote-unquote lazy tank in dungeons, my personal preferences for how fun I think each tank is to use in dungeons, some general tank tips for all tanks, and then some general tips for each individual tanks. Alright, now that we got all that covered, let's hop right into the video. Alright, let's start with something a little more bland, boring, and personal preference here. My personal preference for when I want to turn off the brain, unga bunga my way through a dungeon, use the least amount of brain power possible, and just get some tomes, get some XP, get some money, you know, like anything like that. When that's what I want to do in this game, my personal preferences are, first and foremost, I'll always go and pick warrior first. Always grab warrior first as my unga bunga, don't want to use brain tank. After warrior, this might surprise some people, Paladin is next in line. For my ease of use, don't really want to use the brain, just kind of forehead my way through a dungeon. After that is gunbreaker, and then after that is dark knight. Now that is specifically for what I consider to be the quote-unquote easiest to hardest tanks to use in a dungeon. Now, do I think any of them are particularly difficult to use in a dungeon? No. Do I think that there's always a skill floor of some sort for these tanks that you need to know in order to use them effectively? Of course. However, that is what I consider to be the quote-unquote easiest to hardest order. Easiest being warrior, and then paladin, and then gunbreaker, with dark knight being the hardest. Just because of the amount of forethought you have to put into those later two to make the most use out of their kit, while still mitigating properly for your healers. Now, in terms of fun factor for dungeons, my order is actually hilariously different. The most fun tank to take into a dungeon is actually dark knight for me, followed by warrior, then gunbreaker, then paladin being the least fun. You might notice the gunbreaker is sitting in slot number 3 for both of those lists. That's mostly just because of the changes that they received in Endwalker. I used to think gunbreaker was a lot more fun. Double Down kind of made stuff a little funky. It makes it a little weird for me to rank them as high as I used to. I personally just think Double Down's a little strange of an ability, and I'd rather just play a tank that doesn't use it most of the time. Even though I consider Paladin to be quite boring, they're still very effective and very easy to turn off the brain and use. Alright, now that we're talking about my personal preference for tanks, let's talk about just some general tank tips, and let's start with the basics. Use your invulns. Please, use your invulns. Living Dead, Hollowed Ground, Super Belied, Holmgang, please use them, and please use them proactively. Using them reactively, while possible, and in the case of Holmgang, mostly recommended. The other ones you should probably consider using proactively. Super Belied especially, you don't want to play the Super Belied Benediction game. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about, it is the game where you let yourself get low, and oh, I'm low, I'm going to hit Super Belied. White Mage goes, oh, they're low, I'm going to hit Benediction. They hit Benediction, you hit Super Belied. You jump to full, you jump to 1, both of you panic. It's less of a big deal now with Heart of Corundum existing, but still, you don't want to play that game. Please be a little more proactive with it. With like Super Belied, for example, I recommend using it probably around 20 to 30% HP, because that way you hopefully won't have your healers blowing all their big heals on you when you're in like medium-low range. In the case of Living Dead, you may want to communicate to your healer, hey, I'm going to use Living Dead to let me die so I can get full value out of it. In the case of Hollowed Ground, just slam that button. By God, Hollowed just makes you immune for 10 seconds. Use that early, use that often, make great use of Hollowed. Fantastic invuln. Depending on the dungeon length, you can get 2 to 3 uses in a dungeon of just 10 full seconds of I don't take damage, fuck off. Holmgang has an asterisk on it because Holmgang still only works by not letting you truly die. Most warriors that I see that use it well will basically not mitigate, use Holmgang to get down to 0, hit Bloodwedding, heal to full, mitigate properly from there on out. That's how I recommend using it. However, it can also be used as a reaction button, as a, oh, I'm taking more damage than I thought, Holmgang, make sure I don't die. Use it how you want to, however, that is just my general recommendation. Please use invulns often and early. They are very powerful tools. They are on a much shorter cooldown than I think most people realize. You may want to communicate to your healer if you're going to use one like Super Paladin or Living Dead. However, most healers will be able to keep up with the fact that, oh, they used their invuln. I'll let them do their thing. Let's talk some more general tips for tanks now. General tip number 1. Reprisal plus arm's length is an incredibly powerful tank cooldown. Use it. Now, in case you don't know why I'm saying this, I've noticed a lot of things don't do this. It seems to be becoming more and more common. However, I feel the need to always mention this whenever I talk about tanking in dungeons, because almost every single time I bring this up, someone's like, oh, that makes so much sense. I should be doing that. Now, how does the reprisal arm's length combo work? Well, first you hit reprisal, and then you hit arm's length. It might sound a little snarky, that's because it is. It's very simple. You use the buttons. Now, why does this work? Why is this an effective cooldown? Most people only know arm's length as the avoid knockback, avoid mechanics button. However, it actually creates a barrier around you to do that. And that barrier, when hit by enemies, will apply a 20% auto attack slow, meaning that enemies will be hitting you 20% slower, which is, while not literally, effectively 20% more mitigation on you. Combine that with something like reprisal, which is going to make those 20% slower attacks hit 10% weaker, you have effectively given yourself 25 to 30% mitigation from enemies for around 10 seconds. Want to know what else is effectively 30% mitigation? Your 2-minute cooldown. Shadow Wall, or Shield Drawn, or Nebula, or Vengeance. If you combine arm's length plus reprisal and adds pulls, that will effectively be giving you 30% mitigation. It is very powerful. Please do not forget about it. Now, another general tank tip, when you're starting pulls in a dungeon, you want to be starting with one of 2 skills. You either want to be starting with Rampart, or you want to be starting with that 2-minute cooldown I mentioned, be it Shadow Wall, Shield Run, Nebula, or Vengeance. Now, something that I've noticed with the speed of these new Endwalker dungeons is that often you'll want to start with Rampart instead of your 2-minute cooldown. It used to be the standard you start with your 2-minute cooldown. Now I found it feels a little better to start with Rampart, because if you use Rampart, make it last all 20 seconds, go into Shadow Wall, make it last all 15 seconds. I'm using Dark Knight skills as an example here, bear with me. And then you use something like Reprisal Arm's Length, that is about another 15 seconds. The ad pull will probably be dead by then, and then by the time you reach the next pull, Rampart will be back up, and you'll be able to use that for more mitigation again. If you start with Shadow Wall, there's a chance that it will not actually be back up by the time you reach the next pull because of how fast endgame dungeons are going at the moment. Keep in mind, this guide is definitely oriented towards endgame dungeons, as I am listing all skills that you have access to. So, general tip, start with Rampart first, on all tanks. Obviously, if you're playing your tanks well and you know exactly what you're doing, feel free to start with whatever you want, rotate your cooldowns however you want. This is more of a, if you don't know where to start, if you're still trying to learn the basics of tanking in endgame dungeons, just start with Rampart as a safe bet. It'll probably be back up by the time you hit the second pack. I thought we talked a little bit about general tank tips and a little bit of like, these are the general skills you should use in their certain order. Let's talk more specifically about certain tanks. I'll be starting with what I said earlier in the video is probably my personal favorite in terms of fun factor, Dark Knight. Now, general Dark Knight tips in specifics here is Living Dead is busted. Please use Living Dead actively. Please communicate to your healer when you're going to use it so they can let you get full value out of it. It still can be very, very good. Other general tips, Abyssal Drain is a very useful tool, even though it is only a DPS gain when there are 4 enemies around for it to hit. Even if it is only a DPS gain in that point, you may still want to use it on 3 enemies because it will still give you a chunk burst heal every single time. More general Dark Knight tips is use TBN off cooldown. Legit, just spam this guy. It's that good. TBN is essentially Dark Knight's only self quote-unquote heal. While there is tons of other healing amongst all 3 of the other tanks, the only healing that you actually get is through Abyssal Drain. Abyssal Drain comes up once every 60 seconds for a one-time heal, not exactly reliable stuff. TBN, the Blackest Night, comes up every 15 seconds and gives you a 25% HP shield. Please use this essentially off cooldown in ad pulls. It is incredibly powerful. Please make sure that you're always saving 3k MP to use this off cooldown. It is almost required for Dark Knights right now. A lot of healers are used to the way the other tanks feel in terms of them self-sustaining all over the place. This is our answer to that, is basically just having to spam TBN. Now, I'm going to give honorable / special mention to Oblation here. Oblation is still a good cooldown. It's no Bloodwedding, it's no Heart of Corundum, it's no Holy Sheltron. Oblation is still 10% mitigation, though. If you constantly combine Oblations with TBNs, you can have 10% mit combined with the 25% health shield and just give your healers a generally easier time. This is that moment when I complain about Dark Mind. Square Enix, please, can we just make Dark Mind reduce all vuln by 20% for 10 seconds? It's just not useful in dungeons. It means we essentially are missing a cooldown. Don't get me wrong, Oblation's nice, TBN's nice, but it would be really nice to have Dark Mind affect all damage. And this is also a note for all you out there thinking Dark Mind will help you in ad pulls. Most ad pulls are going to be doing auto attacks to you, which is 80% of the time going to be physical damage. Dark Mind really doesn't help that much in ad pulls. Use Oblation instead. Let's go and order my favorite tanks, shall we? My next favorite tank, Warrior here, has a little bit of an easier time in dungeons. Bloodwedding, go burr. Don't know what that means. Bloodwedding is an ability that for each weapon skill successfully delivered, meaning that each time you hit an enemy with an attack, essentially, you heal yourself for a 400 potency cure per enemy hit. With how big ad pulls are, you will essentially be full healing every time you hit a giant pile of enemies. Now, I will give some fun facts about Bloodwedding. It is actually also a true mitigation. It reduces damage taken by 10%. And then by another 10% on top of that. And it gives you a barrier that absorbs damage on top of that. It's actually a pretty powerful mitigation tool. It just so happens to also heal you like crazy. More special fun facts about Bloodwedding. Abilities that will auto-crit do auto-crit on the heal. So for example, Primal Rend. It will deliver a critical direct hit, right? That will make the heal that you get from Bloodwedding a critical direct hit. Another fun fact, it's completely unnecessary. Even hitting your weakest ability like Overpower will be still hitting a pile of like 8 enemies around you for 400 potency cure each. Meaning you're getting 3200 potency of cure with 1 AoE. That is a lot. Not even having to count the auto crits in, that will probably heal you through at least half of your HP. While it is a neat interaction that you can make the Bloodwedding heals auto crit, it is completely unnecessary. Just kind of use Bloodwedding off cooldown. A little bit of a technical thing that I think I touched on earlier. If you find yourself getting low, you may want to have yourself hit Home Gang and just kind of sit around 1 HP for a bit, and then use Bloodwedding to full heal yourself before going back into your normal rotation of mitigations. This applies a bit more when you're, in fact, this applies a bit more when my brain works, but applies a bit more, in fact, when you're just having troubles with the pull. Either your party's DPS is low, your healer's just struggling to keep up because they're new or inexperienced on their role or something. But regardless, it is a combo you can pull off. One final small mention. Vengeance deals damage. So while I said for a lot of other tanks you want to start with Rampart, you might want to start with your 2-minute Warrior simply because it does damage back to enemies as they hit you. Not a massive amount, but it'll make pulls go faster. Another thing that I've completely forgotten about because I do it as such second nature is Thrill of the Battle plus Equilibrium. Now, what do I mean by that? Thrill of the Battle increases your max HP by 20% and restores that amount that it's increased by. Pretty powerful, am I right? And then on top of that, it increases the HP recovery via healing actions on self by 20%, making that 1200 potency cure from Equilibrium 20% stronger, essentially making it like a 1440 potency cure. Math is hard when I'm trying to do it on the fly. But you can use that as essentially a mitigation. As your Bloodwedding runs out, you can find yourself getting low, use Thrill to boost your max HP for a little bit, make it a little easier to heal you up, get a little bit below half HP, and then hit Equilibrium for what will probably be a 30 to 40,000 HP heal, especially if it crits. Warrior is the king/queen of just saying, healers don't need them, and just healing itself back to full all the time. Paladin. In my opinion, probably the most boring of the tanks, especially in dungeon. You don't get any super crazy flashy plays that you can pull off. It's very standard. However, a couple of really cool things that you can make great use of. First of all, like I've mentioned before, first ad pull, slam that hollowed ground, 10 seconds, ain't taking any damage. And why do I say first pull? Because it has a 420 second cooldown, meaning that it'll take a while for it to come back. So if you use it in probably the first or second pull, you'll probably get it back by either the last or second to last pull in the dungeon. Otherwise, you're only getting one use out of it in the entire dungeon. Not great value, if you ask me. Now, other minor things that I feel like a lot of Paladin players might not know is that, first of all, your magic phase is much better at dealing damage than your physical phase. Holy Circle under Requiem Scat is 300 potency. Prominence is only 170. Even if you add 25% bonus damage to that from Fight or Flight, I'm going to pull out my calculator here. All right, so 170. What's 25% of that? Is that? So it's still only 212 potency. With the buff. Holy Circle is 300. It's just more damage. Start in Magic Phase. Other reasons to start in Magic Phase. Look at that. Cure potency, 400. Wonder how many GCDs you get in Magic Phase? 8. Each of them has a 400 potency cure. And before the people come in and say, but Fel, Requiem Scout only gives you 5 casts. Yeah, you get 4 Holy Circles, you get a Confidier, and then you get a Confidier combo at the end of it. Each of those also heals for 400 potency. 8 GCDs, each healing for 400 potency. 3,200 total potency of cures across the course of the 8 GCDs of your magic phase is kind of crazy. Don't get me wrong, it's not like bloodwetting crazy, but it is a sizable amount of sustain. Especially if you are simultaneously using Holy Sheltron to be giving yourself a 250 cure potency heal over time. Combine that with actually mitting properly with Sentinel or Rampart, Reprisal Arm's Length, which does matter a hair more on Paladin because Paladin is missing more personal mitts because they have abilities like cover and intervention instead of more personal mitts. That's another reason why you want to just start Magic Phase. If you kill the pack faster, your lack of personal mitts matters a little bit less. It's still very good in dungeons. It's still pretty easy to make use of, especially because of just how much damage your Magic Phase does. It is like 100 potency more than your physical phase. On the bigger hit of the physical phase, meaning that it's probably at least 50% better. Not even counting how much damage Confidier does by itself. 900 potency with no drop-off. Pretty insane. Yeah, that's the big thing for Paladin. Start in Magic Phase. Make sure that you're not overriding your Holy Sheltron heal over time. You'll do just fine. Gunbreaker. It really hasn't changed much since Shadowbringers, actually. The biggest change to how Gunbreaker operates inside of dungeons is you have 2 stacks of Aurora, which means that you can now have 36 seconds straight of Aurora, which is nice. And Heart of Stone got turned into a Heart of Corundum, which now mits more and gives you a 900 potency cure when either you drop below a certain amount of HP or 20 seconds runs out. Really, it just got a good chunk more HP healing in its kit with Heart of Corundum and Aurora. You kind of play it generally the same way. Spam Faded Circles whenever you have them. It does have a little bit of weirdness now where if Double Down is off cooldown, you want to be using it, which means you need to be saving up 2 cartridges for Double Down. Whereas before, where you would just get Faded Circle and spend it. Now, if Double Down's coming off cooldown, you want to build cartridges into it and then use Double Down. Overall, though, it's still mostly the same job. Nothing too much has changed about it. As for general tips, there's really only one big tip to give Gunbreakers, and that is when you're going to use Super Bolide, use Heart of Corundum afterwards, use Aurora afterwards. Between all of that, you'll probably tick back up by another... You'll probably tick yourself back up to 30 to 40,000 HP by the time that your Super Bolide invulnerability goes off, and that's without your healer healing you. You might think, but you're wasting the mitigation of the Heart of Corundum. Heart of Corundum has a 25-second cooldown. It'll come back in time. Don't worry about it. being able to burst heal yourself is probably a little more important. And besides, if you're using Super Blide, it's typically a holdover until you get your actual big cooldowns back. And Gunbreaker does have another personal mit, unlike some of the other tanks, and Camouflage, which, while it's only a 10% damage reduction, the 50% parry rate can sometimes come through clutch, to where I'd say it's probably more like a total of 12% damage reduction. Still not super great, but better than other abilities. It has a tiny bit of a step up on our Ablation. To be fair, it is on a 90-second cooldown instead of a 60-second cooldown, though. That'll be it for the video. This was mostly just some general tips and tricks for tanking. A little bit of specificity on the per job basis. A little bit of general tips. Tanking isn't too difficult right now. And that might make me come across sounding somewhat elitist. However, this is just me giving my general opinion. I don't believe that tanking in dungeons is super difficult right now. Even the quote-unquote hard tank of Dark Knight, just rotate your cooldowns. It's no harder than it's ever been in the past. Overall, I say that even if you are someone who's somewhat anxious about tanking, the idea of having all these ads on you and worrying about dying and not rotating properly and letting your team down, don't let that get to you. Say fuck it, grab all the ads, take it to the next wall. Take every ad, make them all hit you in the face. You are the tank. You are in charge of all the ads in that dungeon. By God, they will hit you in the face until either they die or you die. Thanks for hanging out and watching. Hopefully this video has helped you. If it was, leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. If you want to hear more cat noises, you can watch me live on Twitch, where she constantly jumps up in my lap when I'm trying to do other content, like she is right now. Thanks for hanging out and watching. I hope to catch you in the next one.